Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Steve Sapseed. I'm the Software Applications Director at Solutions. You can hear the audio in this webinar by dialing the telephone number on the screen and entering the access code, or by choosing the voice over IP option so it can be displayed through your headset. We have close on about 70 to 80 people attending this webinar, so I've muted all the lines to ensure there's a minimum of background noise. So, if we're all ready, let's get started. This webinar is going to be divided into 3 parts. Gary Tyndall, the Information Improvement Manager at the University of East London, will share what UEL have done in terms of their progress and findings on developing their Learn Analytics model. This should last for around about 15 minutes. I will then demonstrate a fictitious student engagement monitoring application that has been developed by BME Solutions. And there will then be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions of either Gary at UEL or ourselves at BME. And in order to do this, please use the chat feature on the right-hand side panel of the GoToMeeting panel that you've got there. And you could just ask questions as the webinar goes along, and we will get through as many questions as we have time for at the end, and we'll email people replies to questions we don't get time to answer. So now I want to hand over to Gary at the University of East London to tell you about their Learn Analytics project. And Gary, I shall unmute you. I haven't unmuted you yet. Okay, Gary, it's all yours.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to give you a quick sort of 15-minute sort of overview of what we've been doing at UEL for the last probably about 4 years, actually. And I'm just going to do a quick presentation. It won't be any live demos or anything like that. It's just going to be a quick sort of overview of what we've been doing. Steve, can you give me control? So I don't seem to be able to do the slides.
Yeah, I will do it now, Gary. Sorry. You should have it, Gary.
No, I've not got control.
Okay, I'll move it along.
There we go. Brilliant. Okay, everyone. Steve, I've still not got control.
Okay.
Excellent. Right. Sorry about that, folks. Just to give you a very quick sort of overview of where we've come from. Effectively, we've got 5 phases of the project, and they've not necessarily happened in a sort of chronological order. Some we've run in parallel, but to give you sort of some sort of idea of how the project's evolved over the last 4 years, we're starting out, like many, really looking at student attendance in some detail. And we developed an app for that, and it's used constantly by our student retention team. And then that model then evolved, because one of the things we realised quite quickly was that actually there's a lot more work to be done within this area. So we developed a student engagement model specifically aimed for personal tutors. That evolved then into developing based on a similar sort of data set really, but based around developing whether we could look at develop a single student engagement metric. So that's basically a single engagement figure. Phase 4, we took a deliberate step back really, in that what we wanted to look at was look at some research that informs the way we develop. When I first come to UEL some 25 years ago, this was actually my postgraduate research area around sort of student learning analytics. And lastly, we wanted to develop a sort of student-facing app, which we're sort of in the process of doing. We're quite a long way down the line of that, but it's not yet been deployed fully.
Do you want me to move it along, Gary?
Yeah, can you, Steve? Yeah, sorry about this. So just to give you a little bit of idea around the attendance monitoring. We first started 2011 and installed card readers basically in every lecture room and every workshop room, etc. So started that 2011, all installed in 2012. We integrated new timetabling software with that. And effectively what happens is students have to swipe in at every event. So if you're attending a lecture or a seminar or a workshop or laboratory practical, they have to swipe in at every, so we called their attendance. And we collected that data initially in a data warehouse, been collecting that now for some number of years. And then around about early part of 2013, so around about 3 years ago, we started to develop a Qlik view application, because one of the advantages was that, one, we could integrate all that data, but we integrate it then with lots of other student data. It just wasn't about attendance data. We could integrate data from our student record system. Steve, can you go ahead one more? We use the app to identify those students whose attendance fell below a 75% threshold level. And those students that fell below that, then effectively they would get an email from our student retention team just to sort of indicate what happened. It may be things that they're poorly or stuff like that, or just had some sort of family issues. It really was to engage that sort of contact. What we started to look at as well is to correlate the student attendance performance with module performance. And one thing we noticed quite quickly was that it wasn't quite a linear relationship, but it was a very strong relationship between attendance and module performance, which is exactly what you'd expect. But interestingly, that 75% threshold level was exactly in about the right place actually to identify those students who are most likely to pass their modules against those that were unlikely to pass their modules. Steve, can you move it on, please? Out of the sort of student attendance app, we realised quite quickly that attendance is probably the single most important indicator of student success. There's a whole range of other sort of indicators that link to student progression and achievement, particularly those linked around sort of student behaviour, really, student learning sort of styles. And what we did, we developed a student engagement app that took in a much broader range of data for specific use by personal tutors. So that meant that the personal tutors could monitor their students in terms of how they were doing in terms of attendance, how they were using Moodle, the use of facilities, ebook activity, and also whether they'd submitted coursework, how they were doing in their exams, etc., etc. So the idea when students met with their personal tutors, there was a basis for a conversation. Steve, can you move me along, please? The third phase is in some ways probably the most complicated bit of work. And that what we wanted to do was to develop an app that basically took all this data, because at the moment the personal tutor is great, it tells you, your attendance rate and how well you're doing. But actually what we wanted to look at is, what could we identify the most important features of student behaviour that are linked to sort of student progression. And what we wanted to do is, similar to a lot of institutions, was calculate a level of engagement based on some form of rating system. And the rating system would be used to identify those students who are most at risk of leaving. And the purpose for that really is to see whether we could actually put in place intervention strategies early enough to make a difference. And also we wanted to really give, I think, students themselves an idea of their level of sort of student engagement compared to their cohort. We thought it was quite important that students should also be part of this process. Can you move me along, please, Steve? Just to give you an idea of how these data extracts work, it's a very simple sort of model. Attendance is probably most important. We also look at library access and book loans, Moodle, which is a deep dark place. Actually, it's got a huge amount of data in it. Athens Online Journal, so that's where the students have searched for reference materials. And also we have a scheme where we give out Samsung tablets as part of our sort of offer access agreement to each sort of like first year undergraduate student. And part of that has one core textbook on that as an ebook installed for each module. And you'd also see the coursework grades and marks. I think it's quite interesting, this one, because there are two issues around this. Engagement links with very highly with coursework grade mark, but actually in itself you find that they can become an indicator of student engagement, particularly for what we would call returning students. So that's students in the second and third year of their program. Can you move along, please, Steve? We've got a series of next steps, particularly around this sort of developing a metric. We've got a lot of other applications that sort of we're testing at the moment, but we've got particularly one around diagnostic testing, also whether the students attend our skill zone. So it just gives a skill zone effectively a area where they can develop and see people if they've been referred to for things like essay writing skills, numerical skills, that sort of thing. And we've recently been trying out lynda.com, which is a sort of a video hosting where people put videos up and training guides, and our students have access to that. So we're looking at some of these other sort of engagement measures to see whether they have some value. We're also looking at continuing and refining our statistical model. We've been doing some quite detailed statistics recently, which we're going to use to inform the ratings. Actually, it's very important there's some sort of research behind what we do. We've also been developed a sort of scenario testing model. What you want to do is directly link those with the student-facing app. Can you move forward, please, Steve? Linking the data, you can see there's a very sort of basic thing there. What we're trying to do is from our student engagement app, which calculates the individual engagement score, that has a link into our scenario testing model, which effectively says, okay, if a student has got a score of, say, 70, what does this mean based on previous performance? Does this mean that they're likely to pass? Can it give an indication of whether they're going to get the sort of degree they're going to get? And it's got things like average module marks, etc. So it's quite an interesting sort of approach, really, that what we're trying to do is say, well, can we use some sort of predictive sort of capability there, and then also use that within our different applications. And you'll see also that we also, on the student-facing app, what we want to do is to link all this together so that the student gets their own indication of where their engagement is. We've got an indication of what potentially, if they carry on at the same level, what they're likely to get. And the student-facing app does a couple of things. One, it allows the student to examine how they're doing compared to their peers. And it also, as I said, used to indicate future performance. Can you move me along, please, Steve? This is a piece of work we've been doing. We last year, when about September, October time, we took a little bit of a break because what we wanted really to do is to start crunching this to inform the sort of weighting measures that we were going to use. We took a very deliberate break, stopped developing stuff, and started to crunch the data. And I spent probably about 6 weeks doing various sort of statistical tests. We got to a stage where we looked at basically 18 sort of different sets of weightings to determine some sort of metric, and that was largely dependent on the year and the emphasis. One of the things we noticed, and you know, for students in the first year, you're going to have less data, actually. You're going to have mostly data around what I call student engagement behaviour. But of course, when you get into the continued years 2 and 3, actually, you already have sort of some idea of the academic standing of the student, you know, how they've done previously. And that forms quite an important engagement measure. Although you're correlating it with itself, it's actually quite important. Can you move us ahead, Steve? Not surprisingly, our initial analysis found the highest correlations for attendance and average module marks. No great surprise there. We've developed a sort of quadrant model, based a bit like on the sort of magic quadrant developed by Gartner, but effectively identifies the high engagers from the low engagers. And what was very interesting in the analysis we undertook was just how consistent that was. We don't have to particularly worry about the high engagers. We know they're probably going to do pretty well, but the group that you really want to make the sort of and concentrate efforts on were those with the relatively low engagement scores. And if for example, there was 150 students that you could work with, that you could potentially sort of change from change their mind from sort of leaving or not passing, you can make enough difference for them to get through. It's a significant return on investment. And I think one of the things we're particularly interested in is this: how do you treat, and this is a $64,000 question for us, is previous student performance. Just how important is that? Can you move on, please, Steve? And lastly, we've been looking at develop a student-facing app. We've built a sort of prototype model, almost ready to go out. We're probably going to be testing in the not-too-distant future. And what we're looking at the moment is 4 different sets of visualizations of student engagement. And the first would be around comparing individual student engagement against UEL, school and their course. So how are they doing compared to their peers? We also wanted to sort of provide an indication with it to the student of where they're located in terms of student engagement. So where are they distributed? Are they in the sort of top quadrant? Would we expect them to do reasonably, or are they lower end? Also a little bit around distance to travel. By changing behaviour, by attending more, does this mean that you'll move up? Are you likely to see your results improve, or using Moodle more effectively? Are you likely to see sort of like a change in terms of how well you do? And we also wanted to compare student engagement across time, to give a student an indication basically of their sort of velocity, if they compare, how well they'll do in 1 month compared to another. Can you move it on, please, Steve? Next steps for us on this, we trialled a piece of software called Imprinting, which links into Qlik for extracting the data, for us to also be able to design and eliminate reports, and we've started the procurement process for that. The issue for us, and this has come up at one of the Just Learning Analytics events recently, is do we have effectively 2 slightly different apps, one what I would call student-facing, and one maybe that's slightly different for staff. We haven't made that decision yet. My guess is we may go that to with a slightly different one for staff, but it won't be a lot different. We're in the process of road testing with different student groups, and we want to get some feedback from them, particularly in the way that we design it and we deploy it to them. And also, it's around selecting really the best method of dissemination, whether we email it to students via some sort of PDF, whether we have some sort of student portal. We've already got one of those, so we could easily put it within that. And the advantage of the student portal, you can also have links into some of the other student support mechanisms that you have across campus. So, whether it be dyslexia support, or booking a course on maths or something like that, or English skills. And I think and/or ultimately we'll be looking to deliver it via some sort of student app. We already have one that delivers for our Samsung tablets that's ready, and what we might find is we deliver it via that through the tablets. And I think, Steve, can you move me on? I think that's it. Yep, it's my contact detail. Any questions, please relay and put in the chat box, and I'll try and answer those when we come to the question and answer session at the end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks, Gary, for that very informative presentation on the learner analytics at UEL. And can I just ask, Gary, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
That's good. It means everybody else can hear me. Good stuff. Okay, so my job this morning is to show you a demonstration of a Learn Analytics dashboard that has been designed by BME Solutions using Qlik software. Specifically designed by our senior consultant, David Chisholm, who's also on this call and will be available to ask questions. You can ask questions of him afterwards. Before I show you the model, there is just one last PowerPoint slide I need to show you, which describes the data that is loaded and used in the dashboard. So here goes. In order to create the model, the first thing we need is some core data. So, for example, data from the student record system. We need to know the student number, student name, the course, the domicile, etc. And we also need data from the core timetabling system as well. And I'm just going to mute somebody. There we go. The next thing we need is engagement data. And the example we're going to show you here has lecture attendance, BME logins, and library swipes, card swipes. But it's important to note that we could be using or looking at any engagement data source. We could be looking at clubs or sport or spend on a student card. It's really unlimited in terms of what you can look at. The next thing we need to put in place is rules. So what is a successful overall engagement? Is it 75%? Is it 50%? Is it 25%? At what percentage level is a student at risk of disengaging? Another example would be, well, how many times do we expect the student to log into the BME system every week? Is it 5 times? Is it once? Is it 100 times? Or how many library visits are deemed to be a low or a high engagement with the library? The next thing we need is weighting data. So how important is lecture attendance, let's say, versus BME versus library attendance? Which one carries more weight? Or it may be that a student on a chemistry course, for example, is required to attend more lectures than a student on an English literature course. So there are weighting factors that need to be applied there. All of this data is loaded into the Qlik dashboard, and for users to be able to look at, and also to produce alerts for people like personal tutors, giving them a list of students who are at risk of disengaging, or student services, or emails can actually be sent to students directly. And students could be sent weekly reports in terms of their engagement score, or they could be, as Gary mentioned, put onto a portal, and they can go there and benchmark themselves against the course average, the course engagement average. But the key thing I want to stress about this dashboard is it serves the university at all user levels, whether it's head of faculties, head of departments, personal tutors, lecturers, student services, or individual students. QlikView allows you to view the engagement data across any dimension. And the reason why Qlik is the ideal piece of software to perform the student engagement monitoring is that it is also a comprehensive ETL tool. So you can load and transform data from multiple sources. So our customers that use student engagement probably are tapping into 6 or 7 different sources and load data from multiple systems and display it in a single dashboard. So that's lots of different sources into a single dashboard. So I'm now going to go and show you an example dashboard for student engagement. And I realize we have a mixed group attending this webinar, and some of you haven't worked with Qlik before. But on this dashboard, we have different sheets running across the top of the page here. And you can imagine that this is a series of web pages that respond instantly to any clicks I make or any selections I make. So on this dashboard, our large dial in the middle here is the total score across. Here we're looking at 676 students, and that total aggregated score is made up of attendance, BME, and library. The reason these circles are different sizes is that attendance accounts for 50% of that score, BME accounts for 30% of that score, and library accounts for 20% of that score. So clearly at this fictitious university, lecture attendance counts for more than anything else. We also have our total number of students over here, which will change as we make different selections on the model. So if I chose week 4 in this model, you can see all the dials change depending on what the attendance was for week 4. If I choose the Faculty of Science, I can see I have 56 students in the Faculty of Science with an average score of 61%. Or I can choose, let's say I can choose 2 items, European Union and overseas, and I can see the score for them there. And every time I make a selection, you'll see in the current selection box that selection is put in there. So the data has been filtered by whatever I have selected by, and I can clear, by clicking clear all, any of my selections at any time. I've also got 3 search boxes up at the top here where I can choose, for example, a course. So I can choose BA Fabric and Texture. See, I have 11 students on that course. And because this is Qlik View, it will tell me, if I look down at students, who those 11 students are. So those students in white are students that are associated to that course, and the students in grey are the students that aren't associated to that course. I can also choose a tutor. And if I choose Cyril Knowles, I can see that they have 17, he has 17 students that he is responsible for, and that is the average score. If I wanted to see who those students are, I click on the Details tab, and I can see those 17 students and their particular scores over this happens to be just the first semester, over the first 12 weeks of the term. What's handy is I can sort those students by scores, so I can look at which students are at risk of, are in red. So in this model, red means below 33%, amber means between 33 and 66, and green means above 66%. And I can see which students I possibly need to contact. If I was in student services and I cleared my selections, I could see a list of all my students and sort those students by score as well. So I'm looking now at all 676 students, and by choosing score I can see all of those students that have, let's say in this particular case, red scores. But we mentioned that with Qlik View you can see information across any dimension, and this is an extremely powerful feature of the software. So I'm looking now across department name, but I could look at this information across any single one of these dimensions. I could choose course name and see every single course, the average engagement score across those courses. Or I could choose something a little bit more simple and say by age band, and I could look at, I could choose ethnicity or domicile, etc., etc. I'm now going to move across to the Analysis tab, which just really shows me similar information but in a slightly different way. And I can choose which element of the engagement I'd like to see. So I can choose by attendance. I can see that students between 21 and 42 have the poorest lecture attendance. And if I chose VLE, I might get a different picture in terms of how students attended. And once again, I have this same cycle button here, so I could choose, let's say, by department. Next, we have a reporting tab. And this reporting tab really allows the user to build up a report of their choice by selecting various criteria. So I could choose age band, I could choose department, and I could choose gender. And those columns would simply drop into this report, and I can take this report and actually send it to Microsoft Excel if I want to. But it is very much user customizable. Finally, a lot of you will know Qlik View is pretty good on mapping, and if I want to see a map of engagement just across the UK, I can have a look and see which of the areas where I have good engagement scores and which of the areas I have bad engagement scores. If I chose week 1, I can hover over a red area and see that South West Wales is not very good at engaging. I can isolate that by simply clicking on it and go straight to my Details tab and see the 2 students. If I click on my Student tab, see the 2 students that are at risk of disengaging in that particular area. And the same thing with world map. I can do a very similar thing and see which countries in the world I have good and bad engagement with. But where this application really comes alive is where we look at individual students. So if I go back to my dashboard tab, and I don't need to drop down, I can simply just, if I know it's the first name of the tutor is Cyril, I can click on him there, look at the engagement score, go to my details tab, and see that, let's say, my student, Estelle Keegan, is engaging at 32%. So I need to look at her in more detail. And as soon as I choose an individual student, another tab up here comes available to me. And I can see for this particular student, if I look at total, the blue is students, the black is the course average, and the green is overall. And I can see that this student is scoring below the course average of 61%. I can see it in a different way up at this dial over here. I can also see a picture of the student and all the details of that student, including a clickable email address of how I could contact that student, what they're studying, etc., etc. I could also look at this over time if I wanted to and see that Estelle started off very well and up to about week 3, and then there was a tail off in her attendance against the black line, which is the average for that course. I can look at it further and say, I just want to see the attendance part. I can see she attended lectures for the first 3 weeks, but nothing since then. If I look at the VLE part, this particular student is scoring above the average here. And once again, having a screen like this would be invaluable when you're having a conversation with a student and talking about their engagement. So what I'm going to do now is we'll look at the chat and see what questions we have on there. I will ask probably David and Gary to answer some of the questions. So I'm just going to hand over to unmute you, David. And unmute Gary as well. And there we go.
There's a question coming.
Carry on, Gary. I was going to say there's a question to Gary.
Okay, well, I'll make a start then. There's a question that's come in around the tools we're using for our statistical modelling. Basically, what we've been doing is extracting the data out of our Qlik view model and putting it into SPSS and starting to look at using multiple regression models. Luckily, we have a psychology department here, and one of our senior members of staff actually there writes books and statistics and knows much more about it than I do. But effectively what we've done, we've been putting it into multiple regression and using correlation analysis as well. It's been quite interesting because normally he gets he gets very excited if he gets 200 students. We give him 12,000 students. The first pass of this, first cut of this, we did about a month ago, presented it to one of our senior sort of bodies. In fact, we've done it again in about 2 weeks' time. And actually it was quite interesting. The first cut was we were explaining around about 40% of the variance. So 40% of the exam marks and the variance in that were being explained by the different engagement measures we had. One thing we did notice, and he basically did a whole sort of like crunch it all together. Actually, what I suspect we'll find is that once we start to drill down in a little bit more detail on that, and I've not got the results of that just yet, once we start to do that, I suspect that will start to go right up. What you're never going to do is have 100% of the, variance in the marks explained in student engagement. It's not like that, because actually if you think about it, students often come in with, they often have things that wouldn't collect data on. They have all sorts of different baggage, and I've been involved in projects over the years. You often find some of the baggage that some students come in with, is quite significant really, and it can affect their performance. But if we're anywhere between 40 and 50%, I actually think that's pretty good actually, in terms of predictive value. We've noticed that the data is very consistent actually. Those who identify as a high engagers, they're going to do really well. We're pretty sure they're going to get either a first or 2-1. The low engagers are those that are hovering basically, and they're the ones that can go either way. So I hope that answers your model. And there's a second one. Can't tell you yet how many false. We haven't done the evaluation yet of how many false positives and negatives, so I can't tell you that yet. But we'll be doing an evaluation at some point too. And yes, we have been talking to students around the student-facing dashboard. We're going to pilot it. It's probably going to be later this year semester. We've got different groups of students based in different schools, and what we're going to do is effectively pilot it with, so some will get the dashboard and will get the PDF and some won't. One of the things we've come across, which has been quite interesting, is that if we're, say, giving it to a group of, say, psychology students, they will get sort of some of the visualizations we're showing, but actually maybe another group of students might not be used to that sort of the way that data is presented. So that's going to be one of the key issues we want to address, is to get student input into exactly what they want to see, how their data presented. I hope that answers your question. Is there another one? Issues around data protection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we've been using the JISC code of practice, basically. JISC have put a code of practice and ethics. Quite frankly, we also contributed to it, so we use that. We've basically, at the moment, everything is very our models are secured down. At the moment, we only have access to that, apart from the personal tutors who have access to their models. What you'd find is we have a security access layer so that only personal tutors can access their particular tutees, so they can't see it all over, and we have access to it all because we need to develop and test, etc., etc. But we've embedded these security access layers so only a personal tutor can see his tutees.
I've got one, Gary, of a technical nature, so I'll leap in at this point. I've just got to find the question now. Yeah, the question is about alerts. So is there a way of some sort of early warning system? So you get told that, by the way, this student's score is dropping. Yes, it can. Certainly in Qlik, you could have something which looked at the last 4 weeks average score, compared it to 4 weeks before that. And if the difference was over a certain amount, you could trigger an email to the personal tutor along the lines of, this person's performance seems to be decreasing. But yeah, Qlik has that functionality for alerts. I hope that answers the question. Another question for you, Gary.
Yeah, I've just seen it actually. Yeah. There's a question around students' reaction to the sort of monitoring and reporting. The conversations we've had, particularly with Students' Union, some of the students, particularly in our School of Psychology, where we've been doing the sort of modelling, is actually they typically, I'm not going to say, I say typically, is actually they tend to say that if it's being used for the right reasons, and particularly around, should we say, better targeting of resources, then they haven't got an issue with it. However, there is a sort of balance to be made there in terms of, because some students found it a little bit more intrusive, actually, quite honestly. But as I said, what we're looking to do is to more effectively target resources, and once we explain that to them, then actually we tend to find that they're not as concerned as, quite honestly, a lot of our academic members of staff might be. But there, it's specifically around for us is, what measures can we put in place to help those students? It's the reasons why you do it, really, I think are very, very important. And, whether that's put in place, student support in terms of, more of efficient sort of dyslexia support, or more efficient support around how to write an essay, etc., then that's the students are reasonably happy with that. Or certainly the ones I've spoken to anyway.
I've got a technical question. What map have you used in this app? It is a free version. It's an available extension object that allows you to do mapping. It's the same one shown in the UK and the world, just different selections to enable it to display. And I'm sure I can provide details for that if people want to. Feel free to email me.
Right, I think I've got a, oops, I've just gone a little bit. I've got a question around attendance and performance. What I'd say, certainly in the, to a lesser extent more recently actually, but certainly within the first two, particularly when we were doing the attendance, is actually we did find attendance started to improve actually, and we also noticed performance started to improve. However, you also get what I call a gamification of the system, and that's one of the big issues actually, in that you'd get situations whereby a student, because obviously we had the monitoring thing taking place, and students would give their swipe cards to other students and would swipe in 6 at any one time. So we've tried to sort of do sort of spot checks, because actually the reality is that the attend, you know, basically if you don't attend, you're not really going to pass. We know that, we've seen that, the evidence is fairly conclusive around that. And at the start of every year, during the induction, then we do a slide emphasising the importance of attendance, and also when it goes out around when deans meet with their students, representative bodies as well, that message is still put out. So we have noticed that we've had a slight drop-off in attendance actually more recently, and I don't know whether that's it could be up to all sorts of different reasons actually, but just a slight drop off recently. But in the initial stages, it made quite a big difference. And the question, which is, now that's the interest, $64,000 question this, and I'm not going to be able to give you an answer to this, but the question is, what do students think of these systems? Does a below performance prediction actually deter students and they give up? Don't know the answer to that. What is interesting, I was talking to colleagues at Nottingham Trent University, and they've done something, did something similar actually. One thing they said, which I thought was quite fascinating, was that the students actually, once you started giving them the data on it, they started to compete to be engaged. Now, what they couldn't tell you is whether that made any difference or not. Actually, so they couldn't say whether that actually led to improved performance, but what they did say, some of the feedback they got, was that they started to see that and it actually started to drive up student engagement. The bit about whether it deters students, I can't tell you that answer just yet. We haven't evaluated that yet. That's a difficult one. It depends how far, what your level of engagement is, I think. But it's an interesting question. I just don't know the answer.
I've got a question here. Will the demo engagement app appear on the BME website? I see no reason why not. Steve, if there's a reason why not, shout very quickly, but I'm sure we can put that out there. I don't see there's any issue with that.
I think we will put a version of it up there. It may not be the exact version that we've seen, but we'll put a version of that up there. And there's also, just out of interest sake, a different one that's up on the website at the moment as well, which is, I suppose, a similar purpose but slightly different. But yeah, we will put something up on the BME demo website.
Okay, I've got another question, Dave, around how much resource, how many people have we've got working on that, and how do we work with schools to understand the ratings. Right, we've got basically two of us really work on that. I report in directly to the DVC, so we meet every month, and he asked me to take him through this. So we've got 2 developers. We've been working with the schools, particularly actually. We have a board which is called Progression and Retention Board, which is quite a high-level board, effectively chaired by the Vice-Chancellor, but it's got all the deans of faculty on there and senior staff. And actually, I typically work with that body. I'm part of that body. I report into them as well. So what we've been doing is working with them to determine the relative level of weightings, but also being informed by some of the statistical modelling that we're doing. So I said it's not fully complete yet, the statistical modelling, what we want about it, but we've got a pretty good idea of actually what contributes and the relative value of that contribution as well. So if I showed you the real model, we have what I showed you on the slides is really effectively student engagement behaviour, but actually there's two other sections. I think you saw it more clearly perhaps on Steve's application, but there's a lot around what I call school course characteristics. There's a whole lot of ratings around that. But there's also a whole lot around student profile characteristics. So that may be things like age, gender, ethnicity, etc., entry qualifications. But also it may be, you know, where they come from, writing participation background. It may be travel to study, etc. Yeah, the model's a lot more complicated than you think. Well, I sort of showed you like the basic bit around the student engagement, around the behaviour bit, but not about the other stuff, because that's equally can have a contribution.
Okay, guys, it's time is unfortunately up. It's just gone 45 minutes. I just wanted to, just a quick plug, we have on the 26th of April, we have another webinar, a student engagement model webinar, which is going to be run by Anglia-Ruskin University, so we'll send invitations out to that. And also BME will be our 14th user day. Have a user day every 6 months. The next one is at the London Docklands on the 20th of May. And one of the items that will be discussed on that user day is preparing the data for student engagement monitoring as well. So it really it's just really, I want to end with thanking Gary. Thank you so much, Gary, for your time. The feedback on the chat has been very positive in terms of what you've done. And also thank you, David, for actually developing the model that I demonstrated. And as I say, the email addresses are on screen there. And you're welcome to call any of us. And thank you very much for attending. I'm going to close the meeting now.